I don't want you to go out and think that you have to learn human design. I don't want you to go out and think that this is somebody. It's like, no, this is the invitation back to yourself. It is coming home to yourself because from the time we are born, we are conditioned away from ourselves. Welcome to Unjaded. I'm your host, Vickie Dickson. This is a podcast with a human design spin on building the life, the relationships, and the business that you were made for. Let's dive in. Welcome to this episode of the Unjaded podcast. Today, I'm here with Casey Mariott, and she is the founder of the Self Wellness Project. Casey is a reflector, a 4/6 reflector. So we are going to have some goodness in this episode for you. I know that I have a few reflector listeners, and it always feels like you get the short end of the stick because you are such a small percentage of the population. So if you are new to human design, then something that will be important for you to know for this episode is that reflectors make up just 1% of the population. So they truly are the unicorns. Casey, welcome here. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk about what it's like to be a reflector.
It's so cool to have you here because as we were saying before the episode started, I feel like as a manifesting generator, I'm the complete opposite experience of a reflector. And it's really important, I think, in human design that we value people's lived experience. This is something that another friend of mine, she's a projector, and we've been talking about a lot, is how we oftentimes look to the books and we look to the courses and all of these things. But when you can be in the room with a person who actually has the things that you're talking about, it's completely different than learning it from a book. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Okay, so where will we start? What was your initiation into human design?
So actually, I was very lucky. I, didn't have a lot of pressure in my life to be a certain way or a certain thing. So quite early on, I naturally started living my design. And then later on in life, I got called to be a intuition and psychic healer. So I started the training with that. And obviously, already many things in my body were being activated even before that. And then everything got stronger. And then through friends, started suggesting human design. And as soon as I read the kind of nuances in the way the reflector works, it made a lot more sense to me. It's not intuition so much, rather than that mirroring effect, that sampling of somebody's energy and personality. It's like putting on their skin for for that hour and being like, oh, this is what it feels like to be them. And that made so much more sense rather than intuitively understanding and seeing through them, right? It's more energy reading.
And do you really feel like that when you're in a room with someone? Does it really feel like you're like putting on their energy? And yeah,
it's really bizarre. Like a few years before I even found human design, I went to this party and I came home and I was like trying to explain to myself, what was I doing? Because I knew I was doing something. And so I had this whole mini movie in my head. I was like this superhero Catwoman. I was in this leotard and I was slinking around to all the people in the party, slinking up to them and being like, oh, what are you all about? And trying it all on and taking the things I liked for myself and then going up to the next person and slinking around the party and just putting on everybody's personalities. And so I could I even described as taking the things I liked from them and adding my own layers to my identity without having to live the experience. I was like, I can just get it from other people and decide for myself. It's this really fast way of moving through a very wide amount of information. So it was very much, I was like, oh, it's like a superpower gift.
So when we hear that the reflector aura is sampling, that's how you actually do it. You actually go into a room. So I have a question for you, just because your lived experience is so different than mine. You walk into a room where there are 10 people. You are intentionally sidling up to one and sampling intentionally. Does it happen even if you're not intentional about it? You walk into a room with people, can it be overwhelming where everything is coming onto you?
Well, you know how they say that we have this Teflon aura as well. And a lot of reflectors actually really don't resonate with that because in a way it kind of it comes to you, just kind of hits you, all these new ideas and feelings and emotions. And so, if you're not aware of it, then yeah, it's kind of coming at you. But I think, if you can be more aware of it, or be more intentional by putting down that Teflon aura, then you can kind of go in and go more to by one or like narrow it down. So it's not necessarily always everything coming at you. Like I can go obviously walk down the street and, maybe I'm not hearing 100 people's thoughts, but definitely the people passing me, I can kind of like feel what they're feeling, or like, if someone's attracted to you, it's hilarious. It's just like, boom, you can tell. And for a while, I just, because you don't know how much of it is real at the beginning, right? Or when you're not aware of it. And just so many things come in that you think are your thoughts. And then after a while, you can kind of start, narrowing it down and, fine tuning what's actually coming and being more aware of where it's coming from and things like that. So it's definitely a process. So, that answer, I think, would be very different depending on where you are in your journey, right? Probably some people still just get that full on attack and don't understand where anything is coming from. But you can definitely kind of like narrow it down and be like one voice, one person.
Okay. Yeah. Because I feel like that is something that I hear from reflectors, is that they feel like it's all coming at them all the time. But you seem like you were pretty in tune with this part of yourself being really different from a very young age. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add to that because, there's this argument between projectors and reflectors, because projectors are always like, oh, I wish I was a reflector because they can just shut it off. And the reflectors are like, are you kidding me? Like, it's just like whamming in our bodies all day long. So that's why I say a lot of reflectors don't even identify with the Teflon aura, because it's not their lived experience. And I've talked with some projectors, I'm like, are you just exhausted? Do you just feel like you're constantly penetrating other people's auras? But if they're not aware, they're also like, no, not really. So I'm like, I can't be the ultimate answer for that. That's still going to come out the more we talk to more reflectors and more projectors about how that really happens. But I know the nuances of that. A lot of people aren't really relating with what that means or how that plays out for them.
And that's kind of like human conditioning though, right? I mean, none of us really in the beginning, I feel like human design gives us the ultimate permission slip, even though we don't need permission slips. It's like, whoa, I'm really supposed to be like this, because you always think there's something wrong.
I think we all need permission slips. That's literally, I'm like, literally half of my therapies are just people wanting me to say, that's okay. You can do that. Like we all are looking for that permission slip to like lean into these dysfunctions. And actually that's what my book is about, is like a lot of, unfortunately, or fortunately, a lot of our power lies in our dysfunction, but we're often in this dysfunctional and burnout stage because we don't give ourselves that permission. So we're, instead of being in our functional power, we're in our dysfunctional burnout and just fighting against ourselves. So, the book I'm writing is very much how to turn from dysfunctional into functional, especially when you have these things that are so, they're not going along with this mainstream society right now, which was mostly built by the generators. And, if you think about post-war, post-depression period, that's what we needed. And that's what the world gave us, right? Structured building. But now that we're in this safe space and, if you go by Maslow's pyramid, we're now at self. Now we're coming back to like, okay, but what really works for us? Does this structured building, constant work environment work for people? And it's not. And so that's really coming out now, where people are questioning that and looking for that permission, like, this is not working for me. Is that okay?
100%. Yeah. And I think even the generators, we're tired. Like, we don't want to do it that way either.
Right. And even for generators, like being forced into things they're not passionate about, right? They're still at that burnout level too. So many people are looking for different types of permission for different things. And that's why I love human design, because the very concept of the differentiation, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, even though we know our DNA is unique, for some reason society doesn't allow that. Like, no, you need a very unique environment to thrive. No, we teach a one for all and you must fit into the system. So human design just brings that back and like, no, you are all different. And I love that it gives that roadmap on the very specific ways of how we can operate differently, because we don't have these examples either, these very specific examples of how you might be different. We just haven't quite got to that level of exploration, except for the, minority.
I want to backtrack just for a second to something you said about projectors. Because I love that you said that actually about projectors saying they wish they were reflectors, because that is probably the thing that I hear from projectors the most, especially with very little definition. They'll say to me, but I'm almost a reflector, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think I've heard people say I'm a demi reflector. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh. All the
Yeah.
reflectors are like, no, honey.
Yeah. It's totally different, but it's this. So just because something is more rare in human design doesn't, like, we all have our part to play, right? So and if you are, as a projector, trying to be a reflector, it's like you're not doing your job. So then the reflector can't come
Right.
along and do their job. Like, it's just, we're all connected and we need each of us. But it's so interesting that you said that, because I was like, whoa, that's not just me that hears that, oh, well, I'm almost a reflector.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously as well, because I work with a lot of reflectors and projectors. So this is why this also comes up as well, right? So, you probably
Yeah.
also work with a lot of projectors. I think, the three main ones that you get: manifesting generators, projectors, and reflectors, because they're just so different to kind of mainstream society. So they're the ones who are the first ones to look for answers about why it's not working for them. Same with
That's
manifesting
interesting.
generators, right? Because you jump around all the time. That can make you feel really crazy. And now with the rise of ADHD, or the rise of proper diagnosis, when you look at people's charts, a lot of people coming to me with ADHD, for example, they're either manifesting generators or they have open head, so open head chakra. And so it's like, so these are usually the people that come to me. And so you really start to pick out these commonalities in who's really discovering human design first and what traits they have.
Very interesting. So the people that I get the most, it's interesting because I have an undefined will center, and I probably 98 to 99% of my clients have a defined will, which is interesting to me. And I get a ton of manifestors, projectors with a defined will, projectors with a defined will, and manifesting generators are the bulk of my practice.
That's so interesting. So I have a completely open will center.
Yeah.
But I attract all the people with undefined will center. That's so interesting. Yeah. So a lot of people with open head, undefined will, or the undefined solar plexus.
And mine is, I mean, I do have a few with an undefined emotional solar plexus, but more defined.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But I mean, that's the whole, we attract who we're meant to attract, right? When we're living by our design, like, it's just such a gift for being able to call our people in.
Yeah. Well, our story is the opposite here, but I always thought, I call in people with lots of open or undefined centers, because the journey of trying to balance those is very difficult. And not a lot of people understand what that means.
Most people struggle to create content that brings them paying clients. They buy templates, follow so-called gurus, and I'm putting that in air quotes, and influencers, and they're always looking for the magic bullet. Spoiler alert, the magic bullet is inside of you. Maybe you're feeling stuck. Maybe you're feeling so stuck that you're not creating content at all. You may not know what to say, and you may feel like you're afraid of being seen and heard. I get it. Maybe you aren't even that clear on what it is that you're offering, so you don't have a way to explain it in a way that makes people understand how very important it is that they work with you to change their life. Leveraging your human design is the best way to create content that makes you more money without being a slave to the algorithm. The next round of Content by Design starts soon. Get on the wait list. You'll be the first to know when the doors open, and you'll access some really big bonuses when you join us right away. The link is in the show notes for you. Now back to the show.
If you have a consistent energy center, it's just so consistent. You don't even know what it means to be kind of like whiplashed around by, other people's emotions, or by your fluctuating self-esteem, or by your constant overthinking, right? They don't know, they don't know what that feels like. So I usually get people who have, almost completely, open charts, or like I said, that undefined head, where they're just so plagued by being unable to ground themselves or to find that balance or harmony. So yeah, I really attract people like me, actually. But I know in terms of relationships or something, then the attraction would be what the opposite is. But yeah, so interesting you attract people with defined will center.
I'm just going to bring our listeners up to speed here for a second. So as a reflector, Casey has all of her, so in Human Design, there are 9 centers, and all of Casey's centers are undefined. So when she's referring to open, it's no gate definition, no gates defined within those centers. All of her centers are undefined. That's what makes her a reflector. And remember that in Human Design, there's no such thing as good or bad. It just is. So what Casey is saying is that she is attracting a lot of people with a lot of openness. So maybe that projector with 1 or 2 centers defined, or, any type. I mean, I've seen a manifesting generator, several manifesting generators with just 2 centers defined. So that's what she's referring to here. Just if you're a little newer to Human Design and you're kind of a little bit lost here, we don't want you to be lost. When you say how it feels to have all of this openness, how does that feel to have all of that openness?
It's like you say, like there's no good or bad, but it really creates a lot of dysfunction. Like it's so much work to overcome all of this inconsistency, because what happens when you don't really have this consistency or this activation or these defined centers, each day is different, or you're just thrown around by so many different things. So to ground yourself all the time, and we're not even talking about grounding yourself once a day, right? Maybe I ground myself every morning, but like just by going out into society or having a call or doing, it's like, it can completely throw you out again. So you have to like bring it back in, rein it back in, find that balance and harmony. So it's just like, well, this is why I say, I think people with ADHD, it's a really great connection of what it probably feels like, between ADHD and having all these open centers. It's like, it's hard to focus. It's hard not to get stressed by a tiny little appointment. It's hard not to be like sometimes thrown around by people's emotions, or, it's just constantly being inconsistent, and trying to find your groundedness while honoring the inconsistency that you need to be. So if anyone who's listening also happens to have a lot of right arrows or a lot of open centers, or is like a reflector or a projector or a manifestor, they're going to experience all of these things. So I also get a lot of people with a lot of right arrows, because it's the same thing, right? It's like you can't put too much structure on your day or too much structure on your life. It's very much about, how do I feel in this moment? And then grounding yourself and finding the balance to push through to some kind of productivity or natural motivation. Otherwise, your entire day, you'll be ungrounded or completely procrastinating or something like that, right? It's that easy just to kind of just lose your whole day if you're not constantly being aware and working with it. So it's really hard. I'm not going to lie. It's just like, it's a daily battle. That's why I'm trying to teach people, like, I think when you accept that, then instead of just wasting all your energy being like, I'm so crazy, and trying to cut that part off of yourself, it's more like, okay, I'm stuck in overthinking right now. How can I bring this down, right? So it brings this kind of different level of awareness and a different way to self-manage. And so that's really what I try to teach people, this self-autonomous approach to diagnosing yourself or understanding yourself so you can self-manage. And I think a lot of these people, we're so medication, so easy to medicate people. But a lot of people, medication is definitely needed in some circumstances. But I think a lot of people could probably reduce the medication or even get off it altogether if they could self-manage, and accepting that this is a natural part of themselves and that they just need to manage it every day. But yeah, it's very difficult.
Well, yeah. And it goes back to the beginning where you were saying that, it's homogenization. It's like, you can't be different than anyone else. It's this one system. So I'm a quadrite. So what Casey's talking about is variables. You'll hear them spoken of as human design variables, but it's the arrows at the top of your chart. At the top of your chart near your head center, there's 4 arrows. And that's what she's referring to when she says someone who has a lot of arrows pointing right. So when I say I'm quadrite, I have 4 arrows pointing right, which has been very interesting to discover about myself once I learned my human design, because I was like, oh my gosh, my brain was literally, I did well in school, but my brain was literally taught to function completely the opposite of how I'm supposed to function. And it can be very easy when I allow myself to get into flow to, like you say, my whole day can go by and be like, and here I am, a Manny Jen that's like banging it out usually all the time.
Double.
Yeah. But when the energy's not there for it, or when I need more flow, it's just really, really fascinating. And fun fact, since I started honoring the fact that I am a quad, right? The fact that I need a lot more routine in my life, my eyesight has gotten so much better that I no longer wear reading glasses. And Ra always said that you'll
I've
often
heard that.
see.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's crazy, but it's because I was like breaking my brain trying to make it work in the way that other things work. So it's just, I mean, it's also fascinating. Human design is so fascinating. It's just amazing.
It's like, and can I ask you some questions? Yeah. Do you have defined or undefined head and ajna?
Completely open.
Completely open as a Mani-Gen right flow. So you and I would actually, even though we're completely different types, we would actually function very similar, because that open head also is just like jumping around everywhere. How do you ground it then as a manifesting generator? Well, you have the sacral response to help you.
I do. Yeah, I do. And I mean, I do actual grounding things like yoga. I have a frequency device that I use. Try to be going with my flow as a quad right has been really important. I think as important as understanding my Mani-Gen-ness and how it's okay to do a lot of things at once. But honestly, I could do some more grounding. I could definitely do some more grounding. Like I was meditating really consistently for a while. And just in the last probably 6 months or so, I've been like, oh, I got to get back to that, because I feel the pressure in my head a lot of times. And I don't love that it's there. It keeps me going.
Yeah.
But it's not the best way to function. It's not being in my body as much as I should be.
Isn't that it though? It's like, I'm also like, yeah, I functioned before in a certain way, but it really wasn't the best way for me to function. Like you still kind of reach that burnout or that frustration or disappointment or whatever it is. Like it's still just not quite that flow, that functional, your optimal state. Yeah. But yeah, I guess the main difference with us is that like you get that sacral response where you can be more like, okay, I'll follow this idea and I'll follow that. But yeah, when you're a reflector or even a projector would maybe have difficulty, because reflectors have to wait a month to really see where they're going. So that's even more difficult, because how do you know which of these ideas that are just pouring through your mind all the time, which ones should you follow, or same with a projector. They might have all these ideas, but they're not going to know what's the perfect one until that invite comes. So it just adds to that uncertainty. Just, like you have to really get used to uncertainty and not know where you're going, which is also a very right arrow thing. And, I talk a lot about debunking the myth of manifestation, because, if you're really a right flow or, like a reflector or projector, it's really hard to manifest where you're going, or to be so certain, or to be decisive and be like, well, I guess I'm going to follow this path or this idea, because it doesn't work like that. And if you do, you just end up wasting energy, and it may or may not be the right thing in the end. And so I've certainly tried to chase all those ideas like a manifesting generator. And then after a month, I'm like, why do I bother? Now I have 6 open projects that are all a waste of time.
And that is, I'm emotionally defined as well. And that's like the trip is like, I'm trying to book a trip right now, and my husband is sacral and he's going crazy with me. He has 3 left arrows and he's going crazy with me because he's like, how can this be this difficult? And I know like today it's a no. And then like when it comes time when I should be going, I'm putting that in air quotes, should be going on the trip, like I'll be devastated that I'm not going on the trip. Like it's just so that's something that's interesting to me. And I'd love for you to explain it to our reflectors listening in. Emotional authority is a ride and a half. Like I feel like the waiting is just because so I have a defined spleen, which speaks very quickly. And then I have a defined sacral, which speaks. And then I have this emotional nightmare of an emotional solar plexus defined. So if your emotional solar plexus, if you're listening in, we're talking about the right-hand triangle on the bottom of your chart, the bigger triangle on the bottom of your chart on the right-hand side. If it's colored in, you are an emotional authority, which means that you need to wait, which means that combined with many different parts of your chart, but certainly combined with an open or undefined ajna, you are going to have uncertainty as like, it's your day job. Basically, you're not ever going to feel certain of anything. And I know for me, it still makes me feel crazy. Even though I know that's my design, I'm like, I still feel crazy about this sometimes. I can only imagine as a reflector when you have to wait a full month. I always feel though, at least you have a deadline. At least like 28 days. I'm like, mine could be 3 weeks. It could be 3 days. I never know when it's going to be. So how can you explain for people listening in, like, why a month? Why a month for Reflector? How do you manage that? All of the things about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say here about this. First of all, I'll start with the defined emotional decision making. Like, again, right, the more I talk with people, the more I realize that the lived experience is very similar. So, I also am surrounded in my family by emotional managens. And so I get it, right? Like, oh my gosh, I've lived that my whole life. And so, the indecisiveness that all those open centers have is very equivalent to the emotional authority. It almost acts the same. And it's not true that one lunar month is enough, right? Sometimes it's multiple lunar months as well. Like we both are equally indecisive, based on the reflective thing or any like very open charts. It really operates the same. So I feel you,
Okay.
But, for the last 3 years, Neptune was in gate 36, which is the gate of crisis, and I have hanging gate 35. So this connects to make the whole channel. So for the last 3 years, I've been tapping into defined emotional energy. Now, of course, the planet transits don't change me, but I could tap into this. And I always thought my design was, one of the worst. But living with that, tapping into sometimes that emotional energy, I take it all back. I'm like, no, you guys win. It's awful. And, Neptune has just moved out from gate 36. So finally I have the solar plexus undefined again. And I'm looking forward to just not tapping into that random emotional energy that just sometimes hits you and just completely changes everything. And I'm really glad I got that experience, though, because now I can also explain it better to the emotionally defined, because what happens is a lot of them don't realize how much it affects their decisions. And so, there's no truth in emotions. And that's just kind of blows your mind when you think about that, because if you're in a low emotion, there's no truth in it. The way that you feel, it's going to change when you're in a high emotion. And so you really have to be so in tune with when you're in that neutral stage, or just to be aware that you're having that same reaction over all the emotional waves. So it's like when you tell people that there's no truth in the emotion, it's really hard for them to adopt that. So even now, like, because they think, especially when you've got that defined spleen, they think that the first impression matters. So they can clutch to that first impression. So you'll tell them something, you'll have this great idea, and you'll be like, we should do this, but because they're in that low emotion, they're like, no, that's so bad for me. And then they clutch onto that. They're like, well, no, I really felt bad about it that first time, so I'm going to honor that. But it's like, no, it actually can significantly change over the emotions. Or like you say, maybe your emotion today, it might be wrong, but in 2 months, you'll be presented with the same option, but in that time, it's going to be emotionally correct. And you have to release that attachment and be like, oh, okay, well, it feels good now. Well, okay, I'll try it, right? So this is the same as the reflector and the lunar month. What might be a great idea today, in 28 days, you're just like, oh, what was that about? So it's very similar, actually.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a myth that goes around in the human design space about emotional authority, that if ever in your emotional system it's a no, it has to be a no for all time. And I'm like, my lived experience tells me that's not true. Like, exactly. My lived experience is it can be a no and it can turn into a yes. So are there any, just for not new reflectors, people who are new to understanding that they're a reflector, for you tracking your lunar cycle, what's your favorite way to do that?
Do I always advise? I never advise to track the lunar cycle.
Okay.
Because, first, it is how it feels to you, right? Because what can happen is, if you're not really in tune with all the different ways that things feel, if you go to track your transit and you're like, well, I should feel like this today because the transit is like that. But, and I'll start with a little bit what you're talking about is that, the moon is changing position and the planets are changing position, each day. And so reflectors can tap into that energy. But actually, everybody taps into this energy.
Mm-hmm.
But reflectors are more in tune to it. So this is what changes their kind of decisions each day, is because they're tapping into the different energy, of these changing transitions each day. And this is why we might feel different about decisions, right? But yeah, so to explain this, we'll connect with your own chart and with your own hanging gates as a reflector. So that's what I was talking about before. Sometimes you'll be tapping into defined sacral energy and you might feel a bit more energized those days. Other days you might be tapping into something around the solar plexus, so you have a defined solar plexus, right? So these are the things that are changing. It's kind of changing the design that you're tapping into. And so each month we go through the same transitions over and over. So we call this the consistent inconsistency, because on day one of every month, you're going to actually be tapping into the same transit. But it's better to feel it out first, so you understand what you feel. And then I go and look to be like, oh, is that what gate such and such feels like? Is that what tapping into sacral energy feels like? Because also you have to be so aware of what's happening, because let's say that morning you had a meeting with someone with defined sacral energy. Maybe it's not the transit of the day. Maybe you absorbed it and you haven't got it out of your body yet. So I never ever tell new reflectors to track the transit. I don't even tell them to track the 28 days, because it might be longer than a lunar month. And this is actually advice I give to people with emotional authority too. The answer is in the clarity. When it feels clear to you over those multiple transits, over those multiple emotions, generally one idea or one kind of things becomes clearer than the others. It becomes stronger. You feel more defined about it. And then everything else is still kind of unsure or whatever. Look for the clarity. Look for the idea, the concept, the holiday that you want to go. You look for what continually kind of feels right over time. And when you've got that clarity, then you can feel more confident moving forward. But again, right, like a transit is nothing, because we're the synergy of our chart. So I'm a line 6. So line 6 must experiment. So even if I've been holding and, sitting with some different ideas for a month, before I act. So the concept is that only act on the things that are really clear, and you conserve energy, not going down tangents that are not going to lead anywhere. That's why we wait. We wait for the ideas to filter out, to whittle down until we've got that clarity and we're like, okay, let's move forward. But as a line 6, and obviously there's so much we can talk about that for all the different profiles, but as a line 6, I can go and do one little experiment and instantly know it's wrong, right? So it's like, and then I have to trust that. So it doesn't matter that I waited a lunar month. There's just so many things that actually play out in our overall decision-making that can't only clutch to, strategy and authority, right? That's just like step 1. But then you're going to go through step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, like I don't clutch too much to any of those things. I just use it as tools, right? So, if you're having a really weird day as a reflector and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going crazy, or I feel like I'm super wired today, or I'm like having these really weird emotions, then go and check the transit. Sometimes it gives you that explanation that you couldn't give yourself. But, I don't be like, go check the transit every day. I know some people do that. They're like, well, I'll only work on the days that the sacral center is defined. But you know what? You're not the planet transit. You're still a reflector. So if you don't have energy, that I've had days and the sacral's been defined on the transit, but I don't have energy that day. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, how in human design, we talk a lot about the program, and people have many different explanations of what the program is. But one thing you could really say the program is the planet transitions. How do you operate between what's coming at you and what's inside of you? Because ultimately we're still only our design. The transits are something external. So you still have to filter it and interpret it from an internal perspective. We should never take anything from the external world at face value. That's step 1. Then you absorb it and then you make your decision, or then you see how you feel. So I'm like, you can't buy in too much to anything. You can't even buy in too much to the human design system, because if your experience is different, you have to honor that.
I love all of that. So much juice in that. And it is all about the nuances. I mean, I've said 1,000 times probably on this podcast that, I mean, you can take, well, I did a series in December of my whole family. There were 13 of us. 12 of us are generator types, manifesting generators and generators. And we just had a manifestor born in December.
Wow.
So, but you would not look at any of us and say, oh, they're the same. And we have 4 34-20 man-gens. None of them are similar. So it's all about the nuances. Like your profile is huge, but I mean, there's so many nuances to the design. And I'm really glad that you answered that about lived experience, because I know that in human design schools, we're taught to teach reflectors to go by the transits. And I love that you're, again, coming to your lived experience, because human design, we can use it as another way to like shut off our inside feelings, but we really want to use it to go inside and see, how does this actually feel in my body, no matter what our type is. I love that. So good.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the Self-Wellness Project, that's your business name. How did that come to be?
Well, as a reflector, we just feel so much of our communities. And I also have power perspective, power motivation. And it's like, it's also very much about this analyzing society and seeing what's right, what's wrong. And, I also have gate 19 in my personality sign. It's like, what does my society need, to be better, to feel better? And you can imagine as reflectors, it's really hard right now when you're surrounded and just seeing so many people who are not in their power. They're completely debilitated by these dysfunctions, or what they think are their dysfunctions, or because they don't fit in the box, or there's just so many things that make them feel so disempowered. And as a reflector, when you can see very quickly how to help and heal them, that really drove my project. I'm like, I want everyone to start focusing on their self-wellness, and through the path of self-wellness, by focusing on what brings them fulfillment, what brings them success, and what brings them their contentment. When we can go into our self-wellness, we really start healing society as a whole. And you and I were talking a little bit about this before the podcast. It's like, really, we all have this individual role to play, right? And so if we can all just find what our niche is, I call it our success niche. Everyone has a success niche. It's this one thing that you can do better than anyone else. And when all of us contribute that to society, we raise and heal society as a whole. And when everyone has self-wellness, right, you're not going to be beating on other people because you're unhappy, or, like having road rage because you hate your job. Like there's all these little things that we can fix by focusing on our self-wellness. So it was very much about like a very, frustrated reflector just wanting to help people on a bigger scale. And you can imagine, obviously, I was doing I do sessions through that. But even now I'm realizing, because reflective energy is so low, I'm writing a book now, because I'm like, I just can't even, I want to reach people on a bigger scale with these things of how to turn these dysfunctions into your functions, and how to focus on your self-wellness, and to bring yourself to your optimal, being, and your optimal practice and function. So that was kind of the whole inspiration behind the Self-Wellness Project.
And when is your book coming out?
So it'll probably be about 6 months. There's 2 books. And so I've started writing one, which is very much about the healing process, because nothing can start without healing, because you really have to be very self-confident and realize the external influences that are affecting you. So a lot of us are really suffering from things like self-doubt, lack of confidence, self-esteem. So it's really hard to step into your function if these things are undermining you, right? You'll just never have the confidence to move forward. So the first book is about healing, and then the second one is moving into dysfunctional function. So how to switch from the dysfunction into the functional state. And to do that, we really have to embrace this, detachment from self, or what we know ourself to be, because you really have to start looking at yourself from a third perspective and start breaking things down in a very big way. And it's going to be different for everybody, obviously. Some people only need to do some tweaks. Some people need to completely break down their whole life and start again. So you really need to be in a very empowered and strong place to go through that, because it's really a process of uncertainty, change, loss, darkness, but these are the transitions that we have to make. And a lot of people would call this their awakening. This is what people are calling their awakening. I call it, it's your breakdown, it's your midlife crisis, it's whatever it is. It's all the same thing. It's just people being like, this is not working anymore and I want to feel better. And so the two books are really aimed at that. It's like how to just move, again, tied to the self-wellness. How can we just move into that optimal state of self-wellness?
And then we get to change the world together.
Exactly. Through individual. I think literally in my book, I say something like, if you're feeling, frustrated and helpless and hopeless about changing the problems in the world, forget about it. Just change yourself. And that will be enough. You don't need to solve the world. You just need to make sure you are your best person and you will touch everybody in a positive way. Because we don't realize we're touching people in very negative ways when we don't even realize it, like even just snapping at someone or bringing a negative viewpoint. Like there's just so many small ways that we can empower the people around us instead of bringing them down by empowering ourselves and not bringing ourselves down. So it's very much about those kind of concepts.
Can't wait to get it now. Yeah, we need more of that in the world, more of this type of thinking in the world, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because you're right arrows and I'm right arrows, and I very much, attribute this to being what we would call the feminine flow, even though I don't like using gendered terms, but we can say masculine is very like structured and that feminine is, the new, it's what's coming. And something that really frustrates me about all the coaches and thought leaders and spiritual leaders is they come from a very masculine point of view. It's like, this is my one for all solution and you should all follow it. And so they exalt themselves as the leader and the guru. Like that just makes me so sick. Where we need to transition to this right flow where we need to give the power back to the people. And so my book is about more that it's empowering the person. It's saying, no, don't listen to me. Go and listen to yourself. You do not need another book. You do not need another guru or coach. You need yourself to start making decisions for yourself. And so the way I describe it, it's a very feminine approach to kind of intellectualized spirituality to self-wellness. It's not trying to put me as a leader or me as a guru. It's trying to put you as the guru. And, I think this is going to be the big change from what books are already out there for self-help books. So,
and I think that's the whole gift of human design. That's been the gift, certainly in my life and with clients that I work with, is that like, I don't want you to go out and think that you have to learn human design. I don't want you to go out and think that this is it's like, no, this is the invitation back to yourself. It is coming home to yourself, because from the time we are born, we are conditioned away from ourselves, and we are conditioned away from our body's own authority and our inner wisdom and all of those things. So come back. It's just an invitation back. Don't listen to me, to Casey, to anyone. Like listen to yourself for a change. Because we all know we have that thing inside of us and we know it, but that's usually the thing that we think we can't do because it's so scary.
Yes,
if it didn't have to be scary anymore.
We don't give permission. Yeah,
exactly.
We don't trust it. We've lost our self-trust. That's why everyone is so confused because they don't trust themselves. So you have this gap between what someone's telling you is right and what your body is subconsciously telling you. And in the between these two is where confusion arises. Yeah. Right. So everyone comes to me like, I'm so lost and I don't know what to do. And like you say, that human design is a process of bringing them back to self, bringing them back to trusting their decisions again and listening to their body for the decisions and not their mind. So it's really a re-becoming of you. It's a very self-empowering kind of approach. So that's why I love human design as a tool.
Me too. Okay. So where can people find you?
So you can find me at theselfwellnessproject.com. And that's the same name on Facebook and Instagram, or you can also look me up. I post a lot under my name, Casey.Mariott, and that's the same on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Well, thank you for being here. We'll have all those links in the show notes for you so that you can find Casey really super easily. I so appreciate you sharing your lived experience because, like I said, it's not my experience. So it's really I love just having different perspectives, and especially of powerful women. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, lovely to have this chat. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.